Welcome again to the Art of Listening. I want to talk about a few things that I've been aware of in the last few years. Some things that I've found rather interesting and important, and I think very interesting for young people. So often I'm thinking we're hearing something that sounds always a bit the same. And I think that understanding many things like the way we are listening is dreadfully important to really being able to perform well. And if we don't do this in a good way, we somehow just repeat everything that's been heard before. And that's, I think, exactly what the older pianists, the legendary pianists, just did not do. They really had their own sound. They had their own way of interpretation. They really thought deeply about the music, and they tried everything they could to just be themselves. And somehow this is creating a little bit in these days a general tendency to a very high grade of playing. Of course, very great and very good pianists, they're absolutely to be found everywhere. But that's what I'm just saying. The fact that I can say everywhere is not good. There's too many. And somehow we need to find something which goes much deeper into the music and goes deeper into these questions of how do we really make it unique. I've often thought that there are many recitals I've heard, wonderful recitals, sure, but the strange thing about even a wonderful recital, sometimes I've forgotten it within a few days after. And I don't think that's really a good sign. I think a great recital is one you remember years later. I still remember a performance that Benno Moisevich, one of my great loves, I think is a wonderful, great pianist. And Benno Moisevich, I heard him when I was 12 years of age, and I can still remember his program. He performed, even in those days, which was so really exceptional. He played the Ravel Gaspard de la Nuit, and he played a work of Schubert, and I can still hear how it sounded in everything. I just hear it in my ears still. It was, in fact, when he played, it was as so long notes even made crescendos, and that's what I like. I think that long notes are not dead, they're so alive, and that's something I miss very much in today's playing. Somehow many people play the notes incredibly well, so good, and I mean, who can do it better? I don't think we can. But it's not the notes. We want something more than that. We just need that real feeling, what's behind a long note, what's happening there, what do they've got to live. And I'm going to give some demonstrations. Well, I gave a demonstration of that a little bit in my analysing the first theme of the Schubert Sonata, the Schubert B-flat Sonata, number 21. And when I was playing that, I was saying, I don't know whether you can hear it on the recording, but actually this note makes in this way a crescendo. Here. I can hear it. I hope you can. And that may be small. Of course, my piano is closed. It's not even open. I've kept it completely closed. So when it's open, that is even much more. And not only that, I think we've got ways of doing that with our arms. I think that when we're playing our arms, and when we're playing Chopin, by Verheul, I think we really have to make use of that feeling for getting a crescendo. I think these things are very important, and I think the great pianists of the past, Moisevich definitely, could make crescendos in long notes. I think Joseph Hoffman did that also. I think he was one of the greatest in that respect. I think that's one of the reasons he was so great. of course, he had a phenomenal technique, phenomenal. But it's not only that. He was, of course, also an inventor. Joseph Hoffmann made so many inventions that were patented later and well known. And I think, even if I remember rightly, the windscreen washer has actually been patented, was actually an invention of Hoffmann. Also, the springs that they used in planes, they were also patents of Joseph Hoffmann. Amazing. Of course, he made his own keyboard even. But okay, we don't have to go that far, I don't think, to do that. That's asking a little bit too much, I think, and that's not necessary. But a few points like that. When playing, I've found also that some things help a little bit to get that feeling. For instance, playing a long note, if we just play it like this, it's dead. I don't know whether you can hear it, but I hear that it doesn't seem to do anything. And when I do this, it does. It comes at this moment, a bit of an opening. The note opens out. So there's two ways of doing it, either that or that. Do you hear it? I hope so. Anyway, talking about this, how do you do it? This is one of the things that fascinated me for years. And I went away from the recital of Moisevich, trying to work out how did he do it. And then I started really studying those movements and working on the movements, not only of Moisevich, but of Rubinstein and many others, Paderewski and many other pianists, where we are lucky to have some films. There are a few films, not many, but a few very important films. And they all are extremely interesting. Why? Because it shows us how to get that happening in piano playing. Of course, we know the piano was always called a percussion instrument. It just goes boing, boing, which is pretty uninteresting, isn't it? Well, I wanted to say boing, which is a different sort of boing. And I wanted to say, do something with that. And that we do with our arms. When we're playing, for instance, a long chord, it sometimes helps to do a little bit opening out with the arms. Not too much, otherwise we get what Franz Liszt said, we're making eggs. We're stirring eggs like this. I don't mean that, of course. Just a little bit. It should not even be seen. Just that, which might make the hand also move upwards a little bit. I think those things are very important. I mentioned earlier also playing on the pads. Those things I think are generally important. There's one other thing. I mentioned also in one of my previous podcasts, but it's good to do this in connection with this, and I called it organic playing. When something is going up, it should sound differently than when it's coming down. Very simply said, but coming down should somehow sound a little different. Now, I can't quite explain that, and that's the wonderful thing. Sometimes it's wonderful that you can't explain something that you're doing and something that we are listening for. I think sometimes the best things in life we can't explain, and I think that's definitely the case in music. The things that are in between the notes, that's what we've got to get and find. And that's the whole idea of these podcasts. The idea is to find the other part of the music making. This part that we just don't always talk about. Because of course, when we're young, we need to have our technique. We've got to get that. It's got to be incredible technique. But somehow, when you get to a certain age, we need to find more than that. But that's only just the beginning. And that's really the fun of discovery. And that idea of discovery has just absolutely intrigued me my whole life. And that's what actually took me into the areas of playing works from contemporary composers like Sorabji and also Boulez, Xenakis, and many other recent composers. Ernst Krenek was another one, and Wolper. There are many composers that I think are so important and so need to be played by the young pianists today. And I'm a little bit disappointed often that that's not happening. And I wonder why. Of course, I understand it's difficult for some people to program these pieces because they are, for an audience, they are dangerous, of course, because you're frightened you won't get any public. But somehow I've never had problems with that. When I was performing a lot, there was no, I was getting also full halls from playing Sarabji or playing Boulez, Wolper, and certainly Xenakis. I toured around with Xenakis for 25 years, playing his pieces and playing his concertos. And I learned a lot from that. And I think this is one of the things we are missing a little bit in our present day concert life. I think it's got to be more adventurous. We've got to find the adventure back and find absolutely, really the younger composers, the younger generation of composers, and not only the younger generation, but also the generation that's not so young anymore. The generation that's almost gone or has in fact just gone. Because how often do we hear now performances of the work of Sarabji? How often do we hear Xenakis? How often do we hear Verheul? Those are composers that I think are not played enough. Now, talking about that, there's also a reason. And there's a reason for it, and there's something to do with the technique. I wonder whether we are actually doing the right thing with our technical studies. I'm not sure. I really think we've got to find something more than that. And I believe in playing technical studies, Moskovsky and all these composers, Czerny if you need, and many other things, and doing exercises. Absolutely sure we should do that. But somehow it's not enough because these composers ask for a lot more. When you're playing this, you've got to have different techniques for playing Xenakis. We need the techniques of doing this. The beginnings, for instance, of some of the works, for instance, Ionta, demands tremendous agility. I will play some of that later in one of my podcasts. But also other things, the works of Boulez. I gave a small example in one of the earlier podcasts of playing Boulez. And really so important to be able to do those things and have the technique to do it. And my experience is that that's something which is not actually being taught. And I think it's so important that we get to that area and are really training our young people in that way. I'm very pleased and happy that many large competitions these days are including these works also in their repertoire. They're necessary inclusions. They need to be played. And it's a reason because piano playing must never stand still. Performance must never stand still. We must always be moving on and developing our technical possibilities in playing. And well, I hope I haven't bored you with all my talking about this, but it's something that comes from the heart, and as Beethoven said, from the heart to the heart, I hope. Thank you for listening, and there we are. Thank you very much.